I was sort of dragged last year when I reviewed Wisdom Franklyn's previous collection, the Messenger Couture collection, where I complained about how low budget Schiaparelli knockoff it felt, which by the way I still stand by. But people seem to have missed the whole point of that particular conversation. First, I understand that haute couture or couture in general is more of a Parisian style, so I'd understand or maybe even expect some form of reference or inspiration drawn from certain Parisian designers. And no, I'm not trying to say that back then in Africa we never had our own style of fashion, but I just don't think back then we knew to call it couture. Or maybe as a designer you cannot invent your own style of couture, just the way we see how Indian couture differs from Parisian couture. But Wisdom Franklyn is more of a contemporary couturier, unlike a house like Olan Abuzikora whose couture style seems more ethnic, which frankly speaking is not an issue. But imagine investing all your time, effort and resources into creating a couture collection only for it to be considered a knockoff. Right. Now moving on to their latest collection, I can honestly say that there were major improvements, even though we still had a couple of pieces and designs that were referential, like the Schiaparelli couture denim jacket. The collection was titled Haute Couture, though I'm not quite sure what the inspiration was, but when you look closely at some of the elements of the pieces, like the headgears which kind of reminds you of the African women head wraps, this particular look gives this old Egyptian African empress vibe. We also got a number of hats, which when you look back, hats were a major thing, particularly in the 1980s and 90s women's wear, with the influence of designers like Philip Tracy and Stephen Jones. But then again, I can't say for a fact that they were referencing the Western era or something closer to home, especially when you think of the cultural hats of the riverine brides. This, I think, is a reference to traditional Chinese couture, and this webbed hat, I think, also a reference to the traditional Chinese bamboo conical hat. We also saw similar web pieces, but this time in structural dress forms, which I think was well done. Probably a reference to the exaggerated hip vintage couture style of dressmaking. Honestly, I wish we could get a glimpse of what the mood board for this season looked like. But yeah, this is about as much as we get. And I'm going to argue this particular fact to the grave with anybody. Wisdom Franklyn is obsessed with florals and vines because what in God's name is this beauty? Overall, I think it was a good collection with a number of solid pieces. And by the way, this dress, the technique, so clean. It's giving modern day Egyptian empress. Love the earrings, by the way. So that being said, if there's anything I would have done differently from this collection, is the photography. The pictures look overly edited and just so bright. The theme of the entire collection says haute couture, and I would have loved to have seen that interpreted in the photography. For instance, something like this. The outfit still reserves its natural tone, color and features, but her skin, the model, everything just feels more natural, which altogether naturally gives off the vintage aesthetics. Aside that, I think it was a pretty good collection, and I can't wait to see how some of these pieces would look on the red carpet, and I pray for the right event. This is couture, so let's treat it as one. So finally, what's your take on this collection?